Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Thelma Baker sat cross-legged on the torn rug of her one-room apartment, bouncing her crying daughter Sheila in her arms. Her baby hadn't had formula in nearly 12 hours, and the weak tea she'd tried to substitute only made the little girl fussier. Thelma's hands trembled as she unlocked her outdated phone, eyes stinging with fatigue. She scrolled to her cousin Mercy's number, at least she thought it was Mercy's, and typed quickly, "Please, I need help. I don't have anything left to feed Sheila. Even 3,000 can help me buy 1 tin of formula. Please, Mercy." Her thumb hovered over the send button before she pressed it, sending the message into the unknown. She leaned back against the wall and whispered, "God, please let someone answer this time." Across town, Philip Lawson sat alone in his minimalist penthouse, sipping black coffee despite the hour. His suit jacket lay folded on the armrest, and the quiet hum of the city below filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His phone buzzed unknown number. He usually ignored them, but something compelled him to check. Reading the text, he froze. The rawness of the plea sliced through his carefully built, emotional armor. "Sheila," he murmured aloud, his brow furrowing. The name echoed in his mind, his daughter's name, the one he buried 3 years ago. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He shouldn't get involved. But as he read the message again and again, something broke. Quietly, he opened his banking app and sent 300,000 to the attached account. No name, no message, just a silent act. As he locked his phone, he leaned back and exhaled. "What am I doing?" Thelma had fallen asleep with Sheila cradled on her chest, her shirt damp with tears and sweat. The faint ping of a bank notification startled her awake. She blinked at the bright screen, her breath catching as she read, 300,000 received. Her heart raced. "What?" she whispered, staring at the amount again. She checked the sender. It was anonymous. "No name, just the money," she whispered, her voice cracking. Sheila stirred gently. Thelma clutched her baby tighter, laughter and sobs tumbling from her mouth at once. She hadn't seen that kind of money in her account in years. She quickly called Mercy, confusion, and hope mixing in her voice. Did you send me money?" Mercy sounded just as surprised. "What money? Thelma, I've been offline all day." "Are you okay?" That confirmed it. The money hadn't come from her cousin. "Then who?" she asked, the silent air overwhelmed. She got up, barefoot, and placed Sheila gently on their makeshift bed. Moving like a dream, she wrapped her scarf tighter and left for the 24-hour store nearby. She bought 3 tins of formula, diapers, and some bread. The cashier looked at her strangely as she handed over crisp bills. "It's a good night," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. As she fed Sheila warm milk an hour later, she typed another message to the same number. "I don't know who you are, but you saved my baby tonight. God bless you truly. Thank you." She hesitated, then added a photo, Sheila in her lap, finally asleep, a tiny hand wrapped around her mother's thumb. She hit send and stared at the message for a long time. Somewhere out there, a stranger had seen her desperation and chosen to answer with kindness. She didn't know why or what it meant. But she knew this someone cared. Philip sat at his desk long after the office lights had gone off, bathed in the blue glow of his screen. The follow-up message had arrived a few hours ago, and he hadn't stopped thinking about it since. The photo of the baby haunted him, the tiny fingers, the peaceful expression, the unmistakable desperation behind the image. His hand hovered over his phone. He didn't respond, couldn't, but he saved the photo. For reasons he didn't understand, it reminded him that he could still feel something beyond board meetings and balance sheets. As he reviewed a confidential HR staffing report, a name jumped out at him, Thelma Baker. Temporary hire, internal referral by Glenn Baker. He paused. Something clicked. "It's her," he murmured, surprised by the wave of emotion that rose in him. He closed the file slowly, heart uneasy. Across town, Thelma folded her updated resume with care and tucked it into a thin manila envelope. Her brother Glenn leaned against the doorframe with crossed arms. "You sure you want to try this?" he asked gently. "It's just for 3 months. I have to start somewhere, Glenn, she replied, straightening her collar. And it's not like I'm asking to be the CEO, Glenn chuckled. Well, the CEO's a stiff man, barely talks to people unless he has to. Just focus on the test. HR is doing interviews this week. She nodded, but her thoughts were far away. Could the stranger who helped her somehow be tied to all of this? It felt absurd. But she still whispered a quiet prayer before stepping out the door. Let this be a beginning, please. She walked past her baby's cradle, kissed Sheila's forehead, and left to reclaim a part of the life she had paused the day she became a mother. The lobby of Vanguard Systems towered above Thelma like a glass cathedral. She held her breath as she stepped through the revolving doors, dressed in a borrowed blazer and heels that pinched her toes. Her ID photo had just been taken when she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the marble floor, nervous, hopeful, and determined. First day nerves? A young receptionist asked kindly. It's been a while, Thelma admitted. Upstairs, Philip stood at his tinted glass window watching her walk through the lobby, her hair neatly tucked into a low bun. That's her, he said softly. Laura, his executive assistant, followed his gaze. Who? She asked. No one, he replied, turning away quickly. But in his chest, his heart beat faster. He wasn't ready for this. Wasn't ready to feel anything again. But there she was, walking back into a world he thought he had closed off. In the finance department, Thelma was given a cubicle, a simple assignment, and a stern briefing. 3 months, her supervisor said. You're here to clean up pre-merger records. Don't get comfortable. She nodded, biting her tongue. The work was tedious, but familiar. Rows of numbers, budget lines, and digital invoices. She was good at this, quietly, efficiently good. On her lunch break, she walked to the rooftop garden and sat alone, watching the city stretch before her. Below, Philip lingered in the executive lounge, staring at the same skyline. For reasons he couldn't explain, her presence unsettled him. It wasn't just the message or the baby's photo. It was something deeper, something he wasn't ready to admit. That behind those tired eyes was someone who could undo him, not as a CEO, but as a man still grieving. Thelma settled into her routine quietly, mindful of every keystroke and every sideways glance. The finance department was stiff, the atmosphere formal, but she kept her head down and let the numbers guide her. She reviewed dozens of archived statements, reconciling vendor receipts with payments, flagging errors, and correcting inconsistencies. Most of her coworkers didn't speak much to her, but that suited her fine. What she didn't know was that from 2 floors above, Philip was watching. Not overtly, but he had instructed Laura to pull weekly performance summaries on all temporary hires, and her name was always circled. She's meticulous, Laura observed during one late afternoon report. Quiet, though, not a word out of place. No red flags. Philip didn't respond immediately. He only stared at the data, his mind drifting to the photo again, to the night her message first came in. Keep me updated, he said eventually, voice even but distant. One evening, Thelma stayed late, eyes aching from spreadsheets. She took off her heels and stretched her legs beneath the desk. The building was mostly empty, except for the hum of servers and the echo of her own typing. Philip passed by her floor, heading to a conference room for a private call, but paused when he saw her barefoot, focused, unaware of everything else around her. He watched for only a moment, a strange softness settling in his chest. As he walked away, Laura appeared behind him. You've been pausing there more often, she said flatly. I hope you're not making a mistake. Philip didn't look at her. It's not a mistake to notice someone who's trying, he replied. It only becomes one if you get involved, she muttered, turning to leave. Alone again, he stood by the railing, wondering how a woman with so little could carry herself with so much quiet strength. Thelma leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples as she stared at another account entry that didn't make sense. It wasn't the first time she'd seen the same vendor appear twice in close succession, but under 2 different names and slightly altered figures. At first, she thought it was a clerical error, but the pattern kept surfacing, and now she was almost certain it wasn't a mistake. She circled the entries in red, highlighted them on her computer, and jotted notes in her personal notebook. Something was off. Her stomach tightened. Was she imagining it? She took a deep breath, reminded herself of her years in bookkeeping before Sheila was born. No, she whispered, this isn't random. She made copies of the suspicious data, storing them in a flash drive she kept with her house keys. The next morning, she hesitantly approached Vincent Harmon, the CFO, tall, sharply dressed, with an unsettling smile that never reached his eyes. Sir, I've noticed a few entries I thought you should be aware of. Vendor data with overlapping amounts, but different invoice numbers, she explained, handing over a printed sheet. Vincent glanced at it, then looked at her. Ah, Miss Baker, right? He asked with a tone too casual. Yes, sir, he tapped the page. I appreciate your attention to detail. But it's not your place to audit, it's to process and file. Understood? His smile widened slightly. Don't spend your nights chasing shadows. Thelma forced a polite nod and returned to her desk. But as she sat, Vincent's words played back in her mind, not a correction, but a warning. Her pulse quickened. She looked down at her flash drive. If she was right, there was more beneath the surface. And she had just become visible to the wrong man. Philip sat at his dining table with a glass of untouched wine, his fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly. The report Laura had forwarded earlier now lay in front of him, flagged entries, all reviewed by Thelma. She's seeing what others didn't, Laura had written in a single-line email. But his eyes weren't on the data. They were on the handwritten note from 3 years ago. Daddy, come to the garden after work. I made something for you. His daughter Elise had died the same night he promised to come home early and didn't. Cancer took her before he reached the hospital. Since then, he had buried himself in performance reviews and mergers. Emotion was weakness. And yet, here he was, staring at a stranger's discovery and feeling something stir. Was this grief resurfacing or guilt transforming? He left the table and walked to the bookshelf where a tiny music box sat unopened. It had belonged to Elise. He wound it once, let the soft melody fill the room, then placed it back gently. Later that evening, he reviewed the flagged transactions. The names, the values, the strange pairings. Thelma was right. There was something there. He highlighted several lines and sent a discreet message to his internal compliance officer. Cross-check vendor D4762 and D4763 under Vincent Harmon's oversight. Keep it quiet. As he hit send, he whispered to himself, What are you pulling, Vincent? He stared into the darkness of his office, the weight of memory and responsibility pressing against his chest. He didn't know yet what he was about to unravel, but he knew Thelma had just placed herself in the crosshairs of something far more dangerous than bad accounting. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Glenn stopped by the office, holding his niece Sheila in his arms. He had promised to give Thelma a break during lunch and brought the baby along so she could see her for a few minutes. Sheila, full of giggles and energy, squirmed in his arms until Thelma appeared, and the child squealed with delight. "Mama!" Sheila cried, reaching out. Thelma scooped her up and held her tightly, blinking back tears. "Thank you," she whispered to Glenn. He gave her a nod and walked a few feet away to give them a moment. Philip, leaving a client call on the upper floor, caught sight of the scene through the railing. He didn't expect it to hit him so hard. The baby's laughter floated upward, piercing his emotional barricade like glass. He stood still, eyes locked on the joyful child in Thelma's arms. That night, when most of the staff had gone home, Thelma returned to her desk and found a small box sitting neatly on her chair. Confused, she looked around, but no one was nearby. She opened it slowly. Inside was a soft plush teddy bear with a red ribbon tied at the neck. No card, no signature, just a single word embroidered across its chest, Brave. Her eyes watered. She turned it over in her hands as Sheila's laughter echoed in her mind. The bear reminded her of something she'd seen once in a hospital gift shop years ago when she was visiting her mother. That someone had left it for her, intentionally and anonymously, wasn't lost on her. She tucked it into her work bag gently, heart heavy with both gratitude and curiosity. She didn't know who was watching, but someone saw her, and maybe, just maybe, they cared. Laura sat stiffly across from Philip in his office, her expression sharp. "You're watching her," she said bluntly. "I don't know what you mean," Philip replied, though he didn't bother denying it convincingly. Laura leaned forward. "I'm your assistant, not your conscience." but I've been here long enough to know when your interest in a temp is unusual. Philip exhaled and tapped his pen slowly against the desk. She's competent and observant. She's found things no one else has noticed in months. Laura didn't blink. You're not just watching her for numbers. Silence stretched between them like a wire. Just be careful, she added quietly, standing to leave. Empathy looks good on you, Philip, but don't confuse it for atonement. That afternoon, Thelma was invited to a quiet meeting with the audit liaison for an informal review. Laura had arranged it, wanting a closer look at the woman behind the name. Thelma entered the conference room cautiously, dressed modestly and clutching a file. Laura noticed the small burn on her wrist, probably from cooking, and the slight fray at the cuff of her blouse. She didn't look like a threat. She looked like someone surviving. Tell me, Laura began. What made you notice the discrepancies in the payment logs? Thelma answered calmly, but with conviction. They didn't follow the same vendor pattern. I used to do vendor audits for small firms before I left work to raise my daughter. Patterns don't just shift like that. Not if they're clean. Laura's brow rose slightly. After Thelma left, Laura returned to Philip's office, closed the door, and said only one thing. She's not a liability, but she's about to become a target. Thelma was walking to her brother's car after work, holding Sheila's baby bag in one hand and balancing a small box of documents in the other, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly to find Vincent Harmon stepping from the shadows near the garage. Miss Baker, he said smoothly, all politeness stretched tight. Working late again? Thelma clutched the bag tighter. Just catching up, sir. Vincent took a few steps closer, lowering his voice. You're new, so maybe no one told you, but people who dig too deep sometimes fall into holes they can't climb out of. She felt her stomach twist, but her face didn't flinch. I'm only doing my job, she replied carefully. He smiled too wide, exactly. So keep doing that, no more, no less. He walked past her without another word. Thelma stood frozen, heart pounding. Inside Glenn's car, she said nothing until he noticed her silence. You okay? He asked. She nodded too quickly. Yeah, just tired. But her grip on Sheila didn't loosen the entire ride home. That night, after putting her daughter to sleep, Thelma sat at the edge of her mattress, thinking over Vincent's words. They weren't a misunderstanding. They were a warning. And they were meant to scare her into silence. She pulled her notebook from under the pillow, flipping to the pages of data she'd copied. Quietly, she added a line at the bottom. If anything happens to me, look at the CFO. Her hand trembled, but she underlined the words anyway. Then she reached for Sheila's new teddy bear and held it tightly to her chest, letting its stitched word, brave, remind her of what she still had to be. Thelma hesitated when she saw the meeting invitation from Philip Lawson himself. She reread the time twice, heart thumping. Glenn shrugged when she mentioned it to him. Probably a general check-in. CEOs like to appear involved, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. When she entered the executive lounge where the meeting was scheduled, she was surprised to find it empty. Just Philip, seated with 2 mugs of coffee already poured. Ms. Baker, he greeted, gesturing to the chair across from him. Thank you for coming. She sat slowly, unsure of how to breathe. I thought, maybe there was an issue with my work, she asked. He shook his head. Quite the opposite. You've been impressively thorough. I just thought we should talk. You've been quiet since you joined. Thelma glanced down. I didn't think anyone noticed. There was a pause before she spoke again. It's hard to speak much when you're still finding your balance. Philip studied her for a moment. Your daughter, he said softly. She's beautiful. That caught her off guard. You saw her? He nodded. From a distance. Thelma looked away, uneasy. She's the reason I came back to work. I want more for her than leftovers and uncertainty. Silence fell between them like a curtain until Philip broke it gently. You mentioned in your application that you had experience in audits? Thelma nodded. I did before. Life changed. He stirred his coffee slowly. You're not here by accident, Ms. Baker. Keep doing what you're doing. Just be careful who you trust. Her eyes lifted to his. There was no smile, but something genuine rested in his tone. Thank you, she said simply, rising to leave. The door closed softly behind her. but the moment lingered in both their hearts, an invisible thread pulling two wounded souls closer. That night, Thelma opened her worn-out notebook and carefully began copying new figures into the pages. She had decided to document everything: vendor IDs, invoice duplications, payment dates. Her handwriting was neat, methodical, as if each pen stroke would anchor her truth. A second notebook, smaller and kept hidden in Sheila's old diaper bag, held copies of the riskiest entries. She didn't know how deep this went or how far she'd be allowed to dig, but if anything happened, someone would know she had tried. Her instincts were no longer rooted in fear. They were driven by a need to protect her child. "You have to be smart," she whispered to herself, "because you can't afford to be safe." Every time she flipped another suspicious page, she could hear Vincent's voice in her head, and each time it made her grip the pen tighter. During lunch breaks, Thelma quietly visited the supply room to photocopy certain reports. She avoided suspicion, made light conversation when necessary, and filed every page like she was building a defense. Glenn noticed how tired she looked and offered to help with Sheila more often. "You're burning out," he warned. "Whatever's going on, don't lose yourself in it." She only smiled in reply. "I can't afford to lose anything," she said gently. One afternoon, as she reviewed supplier statements, she caught a glaring overpayment to a company called Norvin Supplies. The amount was two neat, round figures, 3 months in a row. She highlighted it, heart racing, and added it to the red folder she now kept locked in her drawer. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she sat in the corner of the room where Sheila was snuggled with her bear, writing in silence, surrounded by numbers that could speak louder than any threat if anyone dared to listen. Philip stood at the window of his office as twilight sank over the city. Glenn had stopped by earlier with personnel updates, and in a moment of hesitation, Philip asked the question that had been on his mind. "Your sister, Thelma. She's the one who sent the message, isn't she?" Glenn blinked, caught off guard. "You knew?" he asked, almost accusingly. Philip nodded once. "Not immediately, but after her name crossed my desk and I saw her with the baby, yes." Glenn leaned on the desk, frowning. "She doesn't know it was you, and she won't." "Not from me," Philip answered. "I only helped because I could. That's all." Glenn watched him carefully. "I know you mean well, but if you hurt her—" "I won't," Philip interrupted, his voice steady. "I've hurt enough people by staying distant. I won't repeat that mistake." That evening, Philip found himself rereading one of Thelma's flagged reports. The pattern was undeniable. She was connecting dots most senior staff never even noticed. He printed a copy and tucked it into his briefcase. Meanwhile, Thelma sat at her small kitchen table, bouncing Sheila gently with her foot while highlighting another suspicious vendor. She paused to read a line Glenn had scribbled on a post-it for her earlier. "You've always had good instincts. Trust them." Her heart swelled. Somewhere deep inside, she was beginning to feel something unfamiliar: hope. Across the city, Philip placed the same report in a private file labeled "Internal Irregularities Confidential." He stared at it for a long while. He didn't know what Thelma would uncover next, but he knew one thing. He would protect her progress, even if it meant challenging the very system he built. Vincent Harmon sat at his desk with an easy smile, but the pressure mounting behind his eyes betrayed his calm. Reports were circling too closely around vendors he thought had been buried well. He tapped his fingers against his gold-plated pen, eyes narrowing as he reviewed the latest batch of system flags. The name that kept surfacing in whispers and footnotes? Thelma Baker, a temp, a no-name. A woman who should have stayed invisible. He picked up his phone and made a call. "I want the audit log scrubbed quietly. Start with Norvin Supplies, and do it now." He hung up and leaned back in his chair. If this little temp thought she could outsmart him, she was in for a harsh reminder of how power worked at Vanguard. Meanwhile, Laura pulled Thelma aside in the hallway under the guise of needing an inventory update. Thelma followed her into a quiet side office where Laura shut the door behind them. "You've made someone nervous," Laura said plainly, folding her arms. Thelma stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Vincent's cleaning tracks, but he's sloppy when he's scared." Thelma's voice was quiet but resolute. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm trying to do what's right." Laura studied her for a long moment. Then don't do it alone. You and I, we both know what it's like to be dismissed in rooms where men talk over us. But you're closer to the truth than you realize, and that's dangerous. Thelma looked down at her folder, fingers tightening around it. I'm not backing down, she said. Laura gave a slight smile. Good. Then let's make sure the right people are watching when it all falls apart. Monday morning erupted into chaos. Vanguard's internal channels buzzed with tension after a news site published a vague but scathing exposé. Anonymous insider hints at multi-million naira fraud at tech giant. The report cited internal leaks and hinted at ongoing manipulation of vendor contracts. Names weren't mentioned. But the timing sent a shockwave through the building. Philip sat at the head of a senior leadership meeting, his face unreadable as murmurs circled the room. Find out who leaked this, Vincent snapped, his usual charm replaced with fire. Philip didn't look at him. We'll trace the source, he said calmly. But inside, he already had a suspicion and a quiet hope that this was the push needed to crack the system open. Downstairs, Thelma's desk had never felt more exposed. Coworkers whispered when she passed. Even her supervisor had become unusually cold. But she didn't flinch. In fact, she copied a new report that morning, one that clearly linked a subcontractor's address to Vincent's cousin's bank account. When she walked past Laura's office, a folded note slid into her hand. Well done, but be careful. He's watching everything now. She tucked it into her sleeve, adrenaline rising. That night, when Sheila was asleep, Thelma stared at her screen. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed a summary report with attached evidence and saved it under a password-protected folder titled Truth. She emailed a copy to a private address Glenn had given her months ago, just in case. Let them come, she whispered to herself. Let them try. The quarterly board meeting had never felt more like a battlefield. Seated around the long walnut table were shareholders, legal counsel, and top executives, each one tense with unspoken accusation. Philip led the meeting with his usual composure, but there was a subtle shift in his tone today. More deliberate, less forgiving. As financial presentations began, Vincent kept his voice cool and assured, flipping slides with precision. But then Philip looked to the corner of the room. Miss Baker, he called. All heads turned. Thelma stood from her seat, palms damp as she carried a small folder toward the projector. She wasn't supposed to speak, but Philip had cleared it minutes before the meeting began. There's been a pattern in vendor payments, she began, voice steady but low. One that suggests duplication and misdirection of company funds. Vincent's smile faltered. With all due respect, sir, we don't usually permit temps to present at executive meetings, he interjected. Philip didn't blink. Today we make an exception. Thelma opened her report. Slide by slide, she demonstrated the inconsistencies, the aliases, the overlapping payments. Laura watched from the side, nodding slightly with each revelation. As the presentation ended, the room sat in stunned silence. A board member cleared his throat. These are serious allegations. Philip responded, they're also facts, and they demand investigation. Vincent shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. We need context, he said, his tone sharp. But the damage was done. Seeds of doubt had been planted in a room where trust once reigned, and Thelma had lit the match. As she returned to her seat, Philip gave her a subtle nod. In her hands, truth had found its voice. The next morning, Thelma arrived to find her company ID badge no longer opening the office door. She tried twice more, the red light blinking firmly with each attempt. Confused, she asked security, only for the guard to check his tablet and shake his head. You've been locked out, ma'am. HR instructions. Her stomach dropped. There must be a mistake, she said, heart pounding. But no one would give her answers. Minutes later, a security officer escorted her to collect her belongings. Colleagues watched in silence as she packed up her drawer. Laura was nowhere in sight. Her supervisor said nothing, just stared blankly at his screen. The silence was humiliating. Betrayal wrapped around her like ice. What's going on? She whispered to herself as she zipped her bag. All she heard in response was the echo of her heels as she walked toward the elevator. Outside, Glenn's car pulled up just as she stepped into the street, holding Sheila's baby bag in one arm and her red folder in the other. You've been what? Glenn asked, slamming the door after helping her in. Suspended. They said my login triggered a breach on the finance server last night. Her voice cracked. I didn't do anything wrong. Glenn was already dialing someone on his phone, rage simmering beneath his calm. You're being framed, he muttered. Thelma stared ahead blankly. Everything I've worked on, all the truth I've gathered, it could vanish in one command. Sheila, sensing her mother's distress, began to fuss in her car seat. Thelma turned, touching her daughter's cheek. It's okay, baby. Mama's still fighting. But even as she said it, tears rolled silently down her face. She hadn't felt this helpless since the night she sent that message to a stranger. That night, Thelma stood on the balcony of an unfamiliar apartment, overlooking city lights that felt too far away to touch. Philip had offered her temporary shelter in a secured, corporate-owned residence, away from prying eyes and Vincent's influence. It's safe here, he had said earlier, handing her the keys with quiet urgency. Glenn had wanted to argue, but Thelma stopped him. Sheila needs a roof over her head while I clear my name, she said, her voice firm. Now, in the quiet of the apartment, Sheila slept soundly on a borrowed crib, while Thelma paced with unease. It felt like exile, but it was also protection. Laura had sent a discreet message. Stay low. Vincent is searching files. You're not safe yet. Her hands trembled as she reviewed her backup drive. Every document mattered now. Across town, Philip met with a trusted former cybersecurity officer in a closed cafe booth. They planted something in her login session, the man explained. Malware. Probably a ghost click trigger that redirected files under her credentials. Very deliberate. Philip's jaw tensed. Can you prove it? The man nodded. I'll need time, but yes, Philip exhaled slowly. Make sure nothing leaks. She doesn't deserve to be scapegoated. That same evening, Laura visited Thelma under the cover of darkness. We're not abandoning you, she said, handing her a burner phone and a printed document. This shows the first trace of the planted breach. It's not enough to clear you yet, but it's a start. Thelma clutched the phone like a lifeline. Why are you helping me? Laura didn't answer immediately. Because the system expects women like us to stay afraid. Just don't scare easy anymore. And for the first time in days, Thelma allowed herself to believe. She wasn't alone in this fight. By morning, Thelma was back at the work table in the guest apartment study, sleeves rolled up, red eyes scanning documents. With Glenn managing her daughter's needs for the day, she was free to work undisturbed. You took everything from me but my voice, she whispered as she assembled every record, image, and anomaly into a master file. Her strategy was clear. Match recurring discrepancies to specific invoice IDs and map them against timestamps from Vincent's access logs. When the puzzle came together, a pattern emerged, monthly diversions, masked through shell vendors, and funneled into a dormant offshore account. She highlighted the names, matched them to corporate travel documents, and flagged Vincent's suspicious approvals. Each detail tightened the net. He's been hiding in plain sight, she muttered. But this time, she had the proof. Later that afternoon, Laura met her in a quiet co-working space rented under a pseudonym. Thelma handed her the flash drive and leaned back. It's all here. If he tries to destroy the originals, this can't be touched. Laura reviewed the contents, lips parting slightly in disbelief. This is damning. It's not just embezzlement, Thelma added. He's forged digital trails. System-level abuse. If this goes public, it could bring the board under scrutiny. Laura glanced up. Then we need the right people to see it at the right time. Thelma folded her arms. What happens if I walk into that building again? Laura's eyes didn't waver. You won't walk in alone. As they left, Glenn's car waited just around the corner. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, Thelma was no longer reacting. She was leading the charge. Glenn didn't trust easily, especially not when it came to his sister's safety. So, while Thelma worked from the shadows, he quietly conducted his own investigation. During a routine visit to the lower floors, he overheard a hushed conversation in the staff lounge. Vincent stood near the printer, speaking in clipped tones to a man Glenn didn't recognize, an external consultant from a partner firm, allegedly. But Glenn had seen the man once before, at a bar where Vincent regularly entertained clients. We pin this on the girl, clean up the trail, and sell the Norvin stake quietly. The rest folds in. The consultant nodded, passing an envelope across the table. Glenn ducked behind the vending machine, barely breathing. His phone was already recording. He waited, heart pounding, until the men parted ways. That night, he transferred the audio to a secure file, then forwarded it straight to Philip's private line. When Philip listened, his face went cold. He played it again, then a third time, his mind racing. The intent was clear. Thelma wasn't just a fall guy. She was meant to disappear beneath a carefully orchestrated cover-up. He called Glenn immediately. "Where did this happen?" Glenn relayed the exact time and location. "You have video footage in that hallway," he added. "Check it." Philip didn't hesitate. Within an hour, internal security was under strict instruction to preserve every frame from that corridor. That evening, Glenn met Thelma and Laura at the safe house. He didn't speak until he saw his sister's eyes. "You were right to keep digging, but they were planning to bury you in it." Thelma looked down, fingers curling around the edge of her chair. "Then we stop waiting. We go to the top." Glenn nodded. "You have one shot to take him down. I'll make sure nothing interferes." As he turned to leave, he added, "This time, they'll hear your truth whether they want to or not." Philip sat with the firm's legal advisor in his private office, reviewing the transcript Glenn had recorded. "You know what this means," the advisor said gravely. "You'll need external counsel, and if you intend to protect her, you'll have to act before Vincent suspects your involvement." Philip nodded. "Pull everything. I want a full timeline of Norvin's involvement in the last 18 months. And place a discreet call to Inspector Adelaide from Financial Crimes. Tell him it's sensitive, very." With that, he stood, buttoned his jacket, and stared out the window at the skyline. For years, he had protected this company like it was the last thing that gave him purpose. But now he realized companies didn't need protection. People did. And Thelma had risked everything for the truth. Meanwhile, Laura briefed Thelma on the next steps. "The audit committee has been notified. They'll call an emergency review. You'll be invited, under witness protection." Thelma was quiet for a moment. "Will Vincent be there?" Laura didn't flinch. "He has no idea what's coming." Thelma's mind ran through every line she had written, every calculation, every risk. "I'm not afraid," she said finally. "But I won't let him spin this. He'll try to twist it." "Deny it," Laura gave a tight smile. "That's why we have the paper trail. And now we have his voice too." Later that night, Thelma sat on the edge of Sheila's crib, watching her daughter sleep. She gently placed the red folder she had carried for weeks into a larger envelope, marked to be opened only by legal. Her fingers lingered there. "You're the reason I didn't give up," she whispered to her daughter. "And tomorrow we stop pretending monsters wear masks. Some of them wear suits." As dawn broke over the city, Thelma stirred from a restless sleep to find Sheila unusually warm and whimpering. Her small face was flushed, her breath shallow. Panic seized her chest. "Sheila, baby, wake up," she murmured, lifting her child into her arms. The infant moaned softly, curling into her mother's chest. Without thinking, Thelma wrapped her in a shawl, grabbed her bag, and rushed down to the car. Glenn met her halfway. "What's wrong?" "She's burning up. I have to get her to the hospital now." They sped to the closest emergency ward, Thelma's hands trembling the entire time. At the pediatric desk, a nurse led them to a cot and began taking vitals. "Temperature's high. We need blood work." "Is she allergic to anything?" Thelma could barely speak. "No, she was fine last night. She was fine." 2 hours later, she sat in the waiting room, cradling Sheila's tiny sock in her hands. Her nerves were raw. The hearing was just hours away, but nothing else mattered now. Then, as if summoned by her anguish, Philip appeared, his suit jacket damp from rain. "Glenn told me," he said softly. "I had to check in." Thelma looked up, exhaustion etched across her face. "They don't know what it is yet. She's being tested." Philip took a slow breath and sat beside her. "You don't have to be alone in this." Her defenses nearly crumbled. "I don't know how to separate it anymore," she whispered. "Work, truth, fear, motherhood, it's all bleeding together." Philip hesitated before reaching into his pocket. He pulled out the teddy bear he had once left anonymously and set it beside her. "For her. For you. No more masks." She looked at him, truly looked. And for a moment, the world stopped spinning. Laura closed the door to Philip's office quietly, but her steps were firm as she crossed the floor toward his desk. "We need to talk," she said without waiting for permission. Philip looked up, tired eyes meeting hers. It's not about the files this time, she added. It's about her. They didn't pretend to misunderstand. Thelma. Laura nodded. Yes, Thelma. And before you dismiss this, hear me out. She sat across from him, her voice softer now. What you're doing, it's not wrong. But it's dangerous. You're walking a line that cost you everything once before. Philip leaned back, interlacing his fingers. I didn't plan any of this. I helped her because she reminded me of something I lost, someone. But I see her now, Laura. I see how strong she is, how relentless, how brave. Laura's tone was steady, even gentle. Then help her without trying to fill your own silence. Don't confuse saving her with saving yourself. Philip lowered his gaze to the document on his desk, then looked back at her. You think I'm projecting? Laura gave a faint smile. I think you're a grieving man trying to do something right, but you need to be honest about why. Silence followed her words, heavy and intimate. Are you protecting her because she's vulnerable, or because you believe in her? Philip's voice dropped to a near whisper. Both. Laura rose slowly, her expression unreadable. Then don't hide behind silence. Don't treat her like a cause. She deserves clarity. She turned at the door. And Philip, she'll walk through fire if it means saving her daughter. Don't get in her way when she does. After she left, Philip stared at the empty chair across from him. Laura's words echoed louder than any boardroom voice had in years. In a quiet living room lit only by a desk lamp, Thelma spread out documents across the coffee table, each one marked with post-it flags and color-coded tabs. Glenn leaned over her shoulder, reviewing Vincent's financial footprints. You've mapped everything down to the date stamps, he said, clearly impressed. But what's your endgame? Thelma's jaw was tight. We make him feel untouchable long enough to speak freely. Then we use his own arrogance against him. Laura nodded from the other end of the couch. The board is set to vote on additional merger funds this Friday. Vincent will be forced to defend his numbers in front of the very people he's been fooling. We feed him a fabricated tip that you're seeking a private settlement. He'll panic, try to clean up, or cut a deal. Thelma didn't smile. Let him think I'm folding. That's when he'll expose himself. Philip called later that night. Are you sure about this? He asked. He'll be walking into a lion's den. Thelma's voice was calm, almost too calm. He took my name, tried to take my livelihood. He won't take my voice. There was a pause before Philip said, You're not alone. Not anymore. She didn't reply to that. She didn't need to. The plan moved forward swiftly. Glenn made contact with a trusted former Vanguard intern to leak a false narrative. Laura primed the legal department with selective redactions to bait Vincent into overconfidence. And Philip scheduled a boardroom tech inspection, ensuring everything would be recorded. Thelma rehearsed her role again and again. Her hands trembled not from fear, but anticipation. She kissed Sheila goodnight, then whispered to herself, Tomorrow, I stop surviving. Tomorrow, I take it back. Vincent checked his watch impatiently as he sat inside a dimly lit lounge at an upscale hotel. Thelma arrived 5 minutes late, dressed in a muted gray coat, her eyes unreadable. She slid into the booth across from him and placed her phone face down on the table. I heard about the board's questions, she said. Word gets around. Vincent forced a laugh. You're clever. But clever doesn't always mean safe. You wanted to talk? Thelma folded her hands together, voice low. I want it to end. All of it. I'll walk away, but I need assurances. No blacklisting, no threats, no NDA to silence me if things go south. Vincent leaned forward, eyes glinting. That's not how this works, Miss Baker. You came to me. That means you're already scared. She didn't flinch. I came because I'm smart. You don't want this going public. Neither do I, he exhaled slowly. I can wire a settlement. But you delete every file you've copied. I mean everything. And I want your word that this ends with you. Thelma tilted her head. You know, for someone who claims to have nothing to hide, you're eager to make it disappear. Vincent's jaw twitched. Don't get cute. She slid a napkin across the table with a scribbled account number, fake of course. Transfer it there. Within 24 hours, then I vanish. Vincent snatched the napkin, nodded, and stood. As he turned to leave, Thelma calmly reached into her coat and pressed stop recording on the small voice recorder pinned beneath her lapel. She tucked it into her purse, took a slow breath, and whispered, "Checkmate." The boardroom was unusually full, the tension electric. Members adjusted ties, flipped through pre-meeting reports, and whispered behind polished folders. Vincent sat confidently at the head of the presentation table, unaware that the floor beneath him had been rigged with landmines. Philip stood near the window, arms folded, eyes unreadable. "We're here to finalize the merger fund authorization," Vincent began, clicking through slides with smooth authority. "Revenue projections are stable, and third-party audits confirm compliance." As murmurs of agreement rolled across the room, Philip raised his hand. "Before we proceed, I'd like to invite Ms. Baker to present a finding that may impact the board's vote." A collective stir spread. Vincent blinked, his smile faltering. Thelma entered with quiet confidence, carrying a folder and a flash drive. "Good morning," she said, voice calm. "My findings reflect a 3-month review of overlapping vendor transactions and internal correspondence logs, which point to unauthorized fund transfers tied to Norvin Supplies." She plugged in the drive. The screen filled with spreadsheets, invoice copies, and timestamps, evidence no one had ever expected from a temporary staff member. These transactions were routed through fake vendors with ties to the CFO's personal network, she continued, then pressed play on a short audio file. Vincent's voice filled the room. "We pin this on the girl, clean up the trail, and sell the Norvin stake quietly." The silence that followed was deafening. The board member stood slowly. "Mr. Harmon, do you deny this voice is yours?" Vincent's jaw clenched. "This is taken out of context." "There's no context that saves you now," Philip replied coldly. "Not anymore." Security officers entered the room moments after the vote to suspend Vincent was unanimous. His eyes darted from face to face, realizing the entire room had turned on him. "You set me up," he hissed at Philip. "You used her." Philip shook his head. "She uncovered you. All I did was let her speak." As officers cuffed his wrists, Vincent turned to Thelma. "You think they'll protect you now? You're just a placeholder, a headline. When they're done clapping for you, they'll forget your name." Thelma stood unwavering. "Then I'll write it myself on every line I cleaned and every ledger I restored. And they won't forget what you stole." The security team escorted Vincent out, his fury trailing behind like a storm cloud. As the doors closed, the board sat stunned. Laura stepped in, distributing printed summaries of the investigation. "We'll move forward with legal and financial restructuring immediately," she announced. One member turned to Thelma. "You exposed a level of corruption no one in this room saw coming. How did you manage that?" Thelma simply replied, "By looking where no one else bothered to." Later, Philip walked beside her through the corridor, the silence between them heavy, but no longer empty. "You didn't just survive," he said quietly. "You rewrote your role." Thelma looked up at him. "I didn't want revenge, Philip. I just wanted truth to win, for once." And as they walked, side by side, the company behind them finally began to shift in the right direction. Days later, Vanguard issued a public statement acknowledging the breach, the CFO's removal, and the steps being taken to restore financial transparency. Press outlets picked up the story quickly, but it was Thelma's name that surfaced most often. "Former temp exposes multi-million naira fraud," read one headline. She didn't care much for the noise. Her focus was on Sheila's health, her new routine, and the peace of knowing she had done the impossible. Philip invited her to the executive floor for a private conversation. "We've created a new role," he said. "Lead Auditor of Internal Integrity. It's yours permanently if you want it." Thelma stared at the offer letter in front of her. "You're offering me a seat at the same table that tried to throw me out," she said softly. "Yes," he answered, "because you earned it, and because the table needs people like you." She signed the letter in silence, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Glenn was waiting downstairs with Sheila, who was much stronger now, bouncing on his hip. "You look like someone who just walked through fire and came out crowned," he joked. Thelma smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders for the first time in weeks. That evening, she sat in her new office, now filled with light, and unpacked her things. Last out of the bag was the teddy bear, brave as ever, now placed beside a photo of Sheila. Laura stopped by the door. "Settling in?" Thelma nodded. "Feels strange." But good. Laura smiled. That's what real beginnings feel like. Thelma turned back to her desk, took a breath, and whispered to herself, "This time, I'm not starting from zero. I'm starting from strength." The grave was nestled beneath a quiet jacaranda tree, its blossoms scattered like confetti across the faded headstone. Philip stood alone, one hand in his coat pocket, the other clutching a small box wrapped in gold ribbon. He hadn't been here in nearly 3 years. Not since Elise's funeral. For so long he believed that moving on meant staying away. But Thelma's strength, her fight, her fire, had stirred something in him. He knelt, brushing away the dried petals with care, and placed the box at the base of the stone. Inside was the same teddy bear Thelma had given Sheila, only this one bore a new tag, "For the ones we carry in silence." He opened the box slowly, then whispered, "She reminded me of you. Brave and too small for the battles she was thrown into. But she didn't run. She stood tall." His voice cracked, but he didn't turn away. "I should have come sooner. I thought forgetting the pain meant honoring your peace. But that wasn't fair to either of us." A gentle wind stirred, and he looked up at the pale blue sky. "Her name is Sheila," he continued, "and she has your laugh. Thelma doesn't know that. She wouldn't, but it's the kind of laugh that makes you want to keep trying." He stood slowly, brushing his palms together, then placed a white rose beside the box. "I'm learning to feel again, Elise. Not just through grief, but through people like her, people who break the silence because they have no choice but to speak." As he walked away, a child's laughter echoed from the path beyond, faint but familiar. He paused, smiling to himself. Sometimes the universe speaks through echoes, not answers. Weeks passed, and life began to settle into a rhythm that no longer felt borrowed. Thelma adjusted to her new role with grace, navigating boardroom updates, audit reviews, and the occasional nod of respect from those who once overlooked her. Her office overlooked the skyline, and every morning she opened the windows wide, letting the breeze sweep through like a blessing. On her wall hung a simple frame, inside the original message she had mistakenly sent that desperate night, printed in her own handwriting. Below it, a small brass plate read, "Sometimes mistakes open the right doors." She looked at it often, not for validation, but as a reminder of how far she'd come. From the shadows of hunger to a seat at the table of power, on her terms. One afternoon, Philip knocked gently and stepped in. He wore no suit jacket, just a simple button-down and rolled sleeves. "Busy?" he asked. She looked up and smiled. "Always, but not too busy to talk." He sat across from her, a rare softness in his eyes. "How's Sheila?" "Thriving," Thelma replied, pride glowing in her voice. "She thinks my office is a castle." Philip chuckled. "She's not wrong." There was a pause, long but comfortable. "You changed this place," he said. "And maybe you changed me too." Thelma tilted her head, unsure how to respond. "I'm not looking for a savior, Philip," she said gently. "Just space to stand in my truth." He nodded. "Then I'll keep building that space beside you, however long you'll let me." Their eyes met, steady, honest, no romance yet. Just the quiet, unshakable bond between two survivors who found strength in each other's fight. And in that unspoken understanding, a new chapter was waiting just beyond the glass. Here's the Bible verse. Psalm 34, verse 18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Moral of the story. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a quiet cry for help. This story teaches that strength doesn't always roar. It sometimes comes in the form of a whisper, a mistake, or a desperate message sent into the dark. Thelma's journey reminds us that integrity, courage, and truth will always rise, especially when paired with empathy and quiet allies who choose to believe in the overlooked. No act of kindness is ever wasted, and no voice is too small to bring down walls built on corruption. In the end, dignity is not given, it is reclaimed.